This is Film Tank.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back.
Oh, I don't know if it's on, but I like it.
You know, we're sitting here like a couple of regular fellas. We're going to make film history.
Can you say that again? Just the way you said it.
Poor baby is starting to lose their hair.
They won't know what they're looking at or why they like it, but they'll know they want it.
It's not real time, it's showtime. Are you guys ready?
Hey there again, everyone, and welcome in to episode 203 of Film Tank. I know, we've made it to 203.
Who are you talking to?
I'm glad
Nobody
you
said
asked.
anything.
I'm glad you asked, Nicholas. We are talking amongst ourselves, and we, being myself, Alex Diekman.
I just want to correct you really quick. But last week we established that my name is Tucson Egan.
Okay.
And I'm just a little upset that the continuity is being severed here. I'm sorry, Nicholas. Did you want to say something?
Hi.
Oh, hey. Have you watched any pornos recently?
Nope, not this week. Check in next week.
Are you okay?
Yep. Doing great.
I was going to say, that's like a need to live type thing.
Yep.
So
It's almost as if I'm not Nick.
Oh, buddy. Hold my hand. Ow.
Wow.
Hello.
Yeah, so this crew here is back at it again.
Yep.
For the 203rd time.
Yeah.
And
Don't call it a comeback.
Okay.
Are we in we can't get divorced, hump? You know, at a certain point, now we have to raise our children, and they have to be in college before we can even think about.
Yeah,
parting
it does.
ways.
It does feel like at some point we're going to start trying on this podcast.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen one of these days.
I don't know when it's going to be.
Hey, you know what? We got a new theme song. That's step one.
I believe it's gonna happen, man. It's gonna happen.
Yeah. Someday.
Someday we're gonna do great.
And then someday you turn around and your children are all grown up, and you're like, "What the fuck happened?"
Yeah, we wasted our lives.
Yeah.
Oh, we're already there, so that's fine.
Anyway.
Oh, our little film tank babies.
So we are going to take a trip in the time machine and go back to do a classic film for the first time in a little while. And
Hold on, I'm pretending that I'm Guy Pearce in the very bad H.G. Wells adaptation of The Time Machine.
It was him in that movie, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and him and Samantha Mumba.
For some reason, I thought that was Hugh Jackman.
Remember when that was a thing? She was in that, and she was in Mission Impossible 2, I think.
Oof.
I don't remember 2.
She had the one hit song,
Mm.
but I forgot what that song was. But I listened to it all the time.
Oh.
Well, one of our goals for
Film Tank.
the foreseeable film for Film Tank, but also for the foreseeable
Yeah, how are
future.
your goals coming along, by the way?
Oh, I was actually thinking about that earlier this
wow.
week.
You haven't done shit.
I have not.
I haven't
So
done shit either.
That might veer into a 2020 goal. We'll see.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
gonna move that to 2020.
I'm almost done with one of mine.
I'm proud of
But
you.
I haven't touched the other one.
I was gonna say,
But at least I'm almost done with one of them.
that's true. But you also it was a little bit of low hanging fruit for your one.
Okay, you
I'm
know
not
what?
gonna have a lot
Hands
of
off
time
my
to
fruit.
do that.
Anyways, trying to get where I was going.
Yeah.
One of our goals this, once we passed the 200 episode threshold, was to do more films that were of the classic variety and not necessarily
What else? What's coming out this week?
Well, I was going to say not what's coming out this week, and also not necessarily just like Academy Award winners. Or
Yeah,
things
I think it's one thing we're always going to do contemporary in the theater movies because that's just why not? That's of the cultural conversation. But I saw that we had a tendency when we had the off week to choose a film that wasn't in theater. 99% of the time, all three of us would choose a film that was made after the oldest one on the podcast was born.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought as an initiative it would be fun to do, not to out your age here, but essentially films that came out before the late 80s. At the very least, and now we can do anything we want to do. It's not some kind of hard and fast rule.
And after that, we're going to follow it up with 2 episodes that are in the theater.
But at least, you know,
okay.
we're trying.
Yeah. Well, I think it'll be good to maybe, I don't know about do like an even split, but like have it, you know, go back and do older films a little more often.
At least, I was going to say, at least for every 2 or 3 recent film, we could do one, you know, and whatever. But some of our, I think, best episodes are things like A Star is Born from the 50s.
It is a good episode.
Yeah, and, you know, even though it was a weird era for us, but I do look back fondly on the conversation we had about the conversation.
Well, when we
When
started,
we just started out.
It did, but that was, I mean, we had Kenny, and all 4 of us somehow watched that movie, which I'm still kind of like in a, I don't know, it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, when we started the podcast, we had this goal about alternating between new movies and
like
old
some
movies.
kind of democratic.
And that kind of went by the wayside pretty early.
That's fine.
Yeah. So, anyways, back to doing some older films, and we have one on this very episode,
Right.
which is a very early Martin Scorsese film, which is 1973's Mean Streets. Definitely in the prime of young, lawn-haired, huge black eyebrow Martin Scorsese, when either he was in the midst or about to start his very well-known cocaine addiction.
Yeah.
So well known, I didn't know about it until we were
You
watching
also
this.
didn't know
No,
that.
Christmas Vacation was
Yep,
the
I was
movie.
gonna.
You know what? If you're gonna hold that over my head,
Oh, we will.
Forever.
well, I don't give a fuck.
I just
care.
wish you were more embedded in white culture.
Fuck off. Fuck off. Look,
There's a black police officer in that movie.
look,
He's so nice, too.
look. In the 90s, you grew up and there was like 2 households and like there's. Okay, you either had like Little Rascals or you had The Sandlot, okay? And I was
I
a
had
Little
both.
Rascals. Fuck you.
I was white, so I had everything.
Sorry, we've talked about Tucson.
Oh, shit.
His community television before.
Fuck you. I didn't have a community television.
So Mean Streets centers around a small-time hood who aspires to work his way up the ranks of a local mob, which, oh man, I don't really know if that is the plot line at all.
Which one is the hood?
That's Charlie, but
Charlie?
Maybe the use
mean,
of
those
that
are the
word does not
character
translate to the
motivations.
contemporary use of that word. I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's an almost anachronistic way of explaining something slightly more straightforward.
Right.
Yeah, I would say first time ever watching this film, him working his way up through the mob is definitely not what's really the main story.
Yeah, somebody's
here.
missing the point.
Yeah, although, you know what's interesting to think about, though? And I know this summary was probably written way after that film was actually released,
Right.
but this came out before something like The Godfather. So, in a lot of ways, the template for what the mafia is, especially as portrayed in visual media, had not been set yet. So, for a lot of people, I'm guessing when they first saw this, when it came out, this would have been maybe, even if it was not subtle but unspoken, this would have been like blatantly.
When
like,
did Godfather come out?
74?
I was going to say, I thought it was 76, but that's
7?
72, so it was actually before.
Hey, so you know everything I just said? Never mind.
Just forget it.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's a good try.
72?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's right in the same ballpark.
I was going to say, they were
this is actually-
being shot at the same
I
time.
was going to say, this is actually kind of right in the coattails of The Godfather. So
I could see that with that finale.
Yeah.
So the two main people here
I should
that
go back to watching.
ended up, if you were Nick, you would.
True.
The two main characters, two main actors here that went on to have larger careers, one of them becoming an all-time classic in Hollywood, are Robert De Niro and Harvey Keitel, who play basically the two main characters throughout the film, although definitely Harvey Keitel's character of Charlie is our main protagonist in this feature.
Yep.
So, Martin Scorsese, again, made a lot of gangster-ish films in his career. We've talked about quite a few times about that he has another film coming out called The Irishman later this year, which who knows what the fuck that's going to be.
That just looks like, okay, I'm going to try to be nice, but it kind of looks like dog shit. Let's just be honest.
The more time has gone on, the more it's
nice.
becoming very...
I'm trying to... If I can't say something nice, at least I want to say it in a nice way.
It's becoming apparent.
In a nice tone.
It's becoming apparent that it's not going to be good.
Yeah.
But I'm in that weird, like, want it to succeed. Like, I'm kind of Charlie, where, like, I want...
You're going to give it so many
succeed.
chances.
Yeah.
I know it's not going to work out, but like I just want to keep convincing
Well,
You
know
make
what?
up for your sins in the streets. You make it up by giving
You
the
might
Irishman
get
a
killed
chance.
for it. So
At least get my hand shut up.
Yeah.
It's fine.
that's probably his jack off.
But this was before some of his classic films of that era, like Taxi Driver and Raging Bull.
Yep.
But at the same time, this is really his announcement to a lot of film people and also just the general audiences of that time of who Martin Scorsese was.
It's definitely his first true crime epic, so to speak.
And it was my first time ever seeing it, so I'm excited because I'm a huge fan. I'm obviously a huge fan of modern Scorsese, so definitely interesting to see something that is definitely different. I guess I'll just go ahead and just give my initial thoughts. I think this film's pretty good, and I don't think it's in the same quality ballpark as the other films that I really love of his. But at the same time, I really enjoy a lot of the rawness of this film because, like, the refined storytelling and conversations and also filmmaking that we see in his later films clearly was built over time. It was not just a, drop and go type thing, which, I mean, that's just the way it is. And I feel like as time has gone on, the longer somebody's in the game, the more clear it's going to become with all the advances in technology and all the different things that you learn as a filmmaker, especially a filmmaker of the caliber of somebody like Martin Scorsese. So, I mean, I think you could easily compare this to something like Paul Thomas Anderson's Hard Eight in terms of it being a very good first film, but also to, like, if you look back on it, you could definitely see that they just grew from where that started.
You see the foundation very clearly, and I would say both those films where, like in Mean Streets, you can almost certain shots echo movies he will make 20 years later.
Oh, yeah.
In a very fascinating way, not in a just repeating himself.
Yeah, the opening scene in the bar, which scenes in bars are very prevalent in most Scorsese gangster films, if not just his regular films. But the opening scene in the bar where Robert De Niro's very brash character is being carried in. He shows up to the bar without any pants on. He's kind of flamboyant. Yeah, he's flamboyantly walking through, like waving his arms up and down. I made the comment, I'm like, this guy is dead. Like, there's no way he's making it to the end of this movie. And I thought that Harvey Keitel was going to be the one who kills him because that would seem to be the natural progression of him not being able to handle his terrible behavior, and he's only able to vouch for him for so long, whatever. And it didn't end up being that. But at the same time, that's just a very Scorsese type character. Somebody like name any of the characters that Joe Pesci played.
Yeah. I was going to say it was fun to see Robert in the kind of flip side of what he would go on to be.
So that part of it was good, and I think I'm totally in agreement with you, Nick, in terms of like laying the groundwork for his style, I would say. I mean, the Rolling Stone songs and the way that the music was played throughout. You could definitely tell that this film was edited a lot differently than his modern films have been. I mean, he's been working with Thelma Schoonmaker for
since
a
the
long
beginning,
time.
as far as I thought.
Well, even if she did do this film, which I don't know, that style has not been made yet. Like the quick cuts, it just was not there. So definitely different to see that. Another thing here that made it I don't want to say difficult to watch because it was fine, but watching a film of his and having the dialogue that's happening be so different from what the actors on screen are saying is very weird to see, just because seeing kind of the way his actors perform and the perfect editing that he has usually throughout his films. It's just a different time in the early 70s, so they probably weren't able to sync up everything, but it was like there was a couple of times where it was like a bad dub job was being done.
As someone who's been consistently watching movies from this era and in New York City, that in and of itself is a production and logistic nightmare. To record dialogue on an actual live New York street. So, yeah, I'm not saying you're wrong or anything like that, but that was prevalent in anything from that was made on a shoestring budget to something that even had at least a coin in his pocket like this.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right in that it's very noticeable at times, but that's also that was par for the course for that era. I will just say to add, because I looked it up just to make sure, ironically, before I even looked it up, I was going to say his debut film, which is Who's That Knocking at My Door, which was Harvey Keitel's also first film, is more edited like his later film, where there's a lot of quick cuts and whatnot and montage style. Apparently, Thelma Schoonmaker worked on that movie, and most movies since then, but not Mean Streets. So I think that's very interesting because it shows, too.
I was going to say, I feel like it's very clear.
Yeah, they have been together since the very beginning, but in this one, there is a slightly slower pace in the sequence.
We just watched something recently. The Snowman that she randomly edited.
Did she? Martin made her do that?
Yeah.
Oh boy, I remember that he produced it, but I forgot that she.
No, I remember seeing her in the opening credits, and then there were a couple classic Scorsese cuts early in that film, and I was like, oh boy, I can see why she was hired.
Yeah,
gotta try to slap as much lipstick on this pig as we can. So, just some more small thoughts before I pass it on to whichever one of you guys want to go next, but. I thought the acting here was actually quite good. Robert De Niro playing this super brash, bro-ish, angry, Italian-type character. I mean, these are the kind of characters that he really did not go on to play, but it was clear that he took something from this role into some moments he had later. Because when he has some crazy moments in his later films, you could see some of this coming out in some of his facial movements and some of his actions, even though he plays that really kind of straight-faced, serious gangster in most of his, classic films that he's in. You could still see this era of him popping out in that, which is very interesting to see how he developed as a performer throughout his career, because this is a role that I would say is pretty outside what he was doing for a lot of his earlier roles. I mean, even if he has some of this happening in Taxi Driver and also to Raging Bull, I feel like it's even more, I don't want to say toned down.
This was very raw. I feel like you can definitely see the capacity for a great actor in him, and that it's a good performance. I think it's a great performance, on par with what you come to expect from him later on in his work. But yeah, definitely he's definitely sort of just honing his craft at this point in his career and just sort of chiseling away at it.
I would say it's very evident that it's a good performance based on the fact that Toussaint was very vocally annoyed with his character.
Oh yeah, I fucking hate it.
Which usually only happens when you're actually liking at least what the person is doing.
Yeah, I like what the person is doing. They have enough of a personality that they're memorable enough that they just piss the shit out of me. Where I actually empathize with Charlie, and I'm just man, he's got to keep on dealing with this guy's shit. He's shooting his gun off on the middle of fucking night, throwing firecrackers and shit. What the fuck is this guy, Bugs Bunny or some bullshit? God, I hate him so much.
And then the last thing I'll say is that I feel like there's a lot happening in that really bizarre pool hall scene where they just start all beating the shit out of each other.
Yeah.
That's a really great scene because of the way it ends, where they pay off the police officers who come to like break it up.
And suddenly that creates like this sort of like solidarity of like, oh, we didn't get like
momentarily,
yeah.
But just how that spirals out of control. But like, you know, in a film like this, you would just assume that like there's going to be guns and knives and crazy shit. But no, like this is just another Wednesday, and all these guys are just beating the shit out of each other because that's just what you do in this era, at least on film. So
they didn't have Xbox. They
Yeah.
didn't have cell phones.
There's a lot of scenes in this movie where I had the thought in my head, boys. Like,
Right.
There's like between something like that, because they're just fighting with like their fucking palms and whatnot, and or like Harvey Keitel and Robert De Niro play fighting with the garbage cans and whatnot. It's a weirdly playful violence for Scorsese, who's later on would go on to do very harsh violence.
But it does obviously
Punitive violence.
turn around later in the film, as the walk-off moment of this film is just the crescendo of all the shit that's been building really the entire film. So yeah, it's overall a pretty solid film. Definitely not his best work in my opinion, but glad I was able to see it.
Yep.
Who wants to go next?
I'll go next.
Alrighty.
Yeah, I like Martin Scorsese films. I'm not sure if I'm as big of a Scorseseite as my other two co-hosts here. I enjoy Goodfellas. Goodfellas is the first like Scorsese film I can remember watching, and I enjoy Casino, and I enjoy Wolf of Wall Street. Silence, very, very different film.
You like Shutter Island too, right?
I do like Shutter Island. You see,
That's a great film.
I've seen more Scorsese films that I can remember, but
The
if you
Departed.
holy fucking shit!
You like The Aviator too, right?
Holy fucking shit! This is what is this what
Flubber.
Don't.
That's not.
I'm
Don't
sorry, that
don't
would
fucking.
actually
Don't listen to
not be
him.
Martin
I
Scorsese.
know that's not a Martin
You.
Scorsese film. You can go fuck
You're
yourself.
good.
Yeah, no, you're not. That's not
Don't
good.
look at me, pal. I gotta live with them.
Shut the fuck up. Yeah, this is the
great
thing
line, by the
with Martin Scorsese films. Like I have seen so many of them. I've seen more than I can remember, and yet if you tell me them, I usually enjoy them. It's like they're just sort of the films that have seeped into the background, where like I know this director and I know enough about him that if I'm going to see a film that he's directed, then it will most likely either be a classic or at the very least very good. Like that's just the kind of director that he is. And that's how I feel about Mean Streets. You know, this is like probably one of his earliest like breakout works that you told me before, Nick.
This is probably his breakout role.
Yeah, his breakout
movie.
like directorial like effort. Yeah. And yeah, I loved all the performances here. Robert De Niro is great. Is it Harvey Keitel? Mm-hmm. Harvey Keitel, I liked him a lot. I actually confused him in the first scene, which I will defend for the fact that I could not like see his full profile of his face. I thought it was Dustin Hoffman, but it wasn't. Shut the fuck up.
Would have been interesting to have Dustin Hoffman in this film.
It would have been
playing
yeah.
that role.
Yeah,
I would
but
tell
Harvey
you.
Keitel was really good in this. I liked this character of Charlie a lot. Just trying to, and you know, I liked what his motivations were in this story. That he's just this, you know, young hood, as IMDb would put it. You know, working for his uncle Giovanni, basically shaking down people for money, while at the same time he's wrestling with this sort of like internal struggle of like, you know, this is what I do for my job, and this is where my soul is sort of like pulling me. He's a good old Catholic boy, and he's just trying to find a way to repent and to do right by himself, by his community, by his family, in the way that he can, because the way that what he's doing right now is the only thing that he knows how to do. And so how do you try to do right in that sort of situation? And the way that he finds at least an opportunity for repentance is taking care of Johnny Boy, who is played by Robert De Niro, who, like I mentioned before, is an absolute piece of shit. But he still tries to like take on that burden just because, you know, he's just trying to do the right thing. Just do the right thing.
Yeah, he gets literally not literally, sorry. He gets figuratively peed on by Robert De Niro.
Oh yeah,
in that last bar
just
scene.
shy of literally peed on because
literally.
that's
I really wish you would have said that, but also not even
that's-
corrected it.
Yeah.
that's the kind of guy that Johnny Boy is, though.
He literally got peed on.
Like he,
At one point, someone spits on somebody's shoe.
yeah.
But that final bar scene when Johnny
Pulls the gun.
and goes all in. That is like the announcement that please shoot me.
Johnny is just a bull in a china shop. He doesn't think of anything outside of like what's right in front of him, whether it be like pissing off a guy that he is supposed to be shaking down for money in a respectful way, starting a huge fucking brawl, or constantly misleading people about whether he's going to pay them back money or not.
You know who
or whether or not he's just going to beat some fucking random guy on the street, or throwing some fucking firecrackers and shit from the fucking rooftops and shit like that because he's fucking drunk.
You know who he is? He's Worm in Rounders.
Yeah.
Oh my god, yeah.
He's always
he
got an ace
is.
up his sleeve.
Oh my god.
He wants to be a fuck up.
Yeah, he wants to be a fuck up.
That's his life
Yeah,
goal.
he wants to run around and do hood rat shit with his hood rat friends, and that's what he wants to do. So, yeah, Charlie should have left him to the side like his uncle told him to. It was like, honorable men stick with honorable men. It's like, yeah, no, I don't know. Should have just. And then there's that whole conversation that Charlie has with Teresa.
He's fucking his cousin.
Well, he's talking with Teresa while they're on the beach. And I think that he said something. He's like, "How can you just turn your back on your cousin like that?" It's like, he mentions this one saint, he had it right, and that's the animating sort of philosophy of his life, that he's just trying to do the right thing.
And it's funny because when he protests against Teresa, and he's like, basically he won't say the words, but he's like, nobody else will do this, so. It's literally his claim to fame of something he knows he could do that's quote-unquote benevolent.
Right.
But it also kind of takes me back to...
It's like social self-flagellation.
Yeah, but I also, the quote that comes to my head for whatever goddamn reason is from Steve Jobs. It's like the flip side of conflict in that movie, but it's the soundbite from Seth Rogen's Wozniak character when he's like, because it's right. There's really no reason why he... should take care of Johnny Boy other than in his mind it's quote-unquote right. All signs point against the healthiness of continuing
this situation, this relationship, this
but
friendship.
Because of the Catholic guilt and whatnot, he's been told that you need to look out after your neighbor and whatnot.
But he's, for whatever reason, latched on to this one guy instead of trying to, just for
he's his brother's keeper.
Man.
And it goes deeper than just trying to help him, because he also brings it upon himself, and we see it, not to take over,
right.
but one scene in particular when you see them running away, I think it's from the rooftop shooting and whatnot, and they are in the graveyard, and I think the cops are busting a party in an apartment, or just something kind of happening, but Johnny Boy falls asleep, and in that moment... Harvey Keitel, Charlie, could basically walk away and he could maybe get arrested, and I think all the problems could have basically been solved. He probably wouldn't be killed, and at least temporarily.
That seems actually interesting, because there's a lot happening there, which is great, because I feel like there's 3 or 4 different possibilities of what's happening at that party across the street, because either it's a bunch of people having a really good time, there's a big fight that's happening, or there's a woman being raped. And there's this really Brazilian carnival music going on in the background. And it seems like Charlie just wants to get down on whatever's going on there. Whichever of the 3 it is.
Yeah.
Man. I really like the cinematography in this film. I do enjoy how the interior shots of the bars are sort of orchestrated.
It lands on what it's trying to present.
Yeah, there were some interesting shots in here. There was, the opening pan over the bar. There was the one dolly shot where you have Charlie dancing and stuff and moving through the crowd, and I that's what's memorable to me, at least. Also, what's particularly memorable are the fights that break out in this film, and just how documentarian that camera like roving around the actual like fight scenes. Like there's the one guy who keeps on like when they were trying to shake down the guy, punches him in the face, and the one guy who was accompanying Charlie and Johnny Boy, who was either periodically like sitting down on one of the stools and getting the shit beat out of him, or being pushed into the back of like one of the pull cues and like breaking them and shit. And I was like, that was really involved, like fuck 'em up. Really involved fuck 'em up. I really enjoyed that. And, like it was just fun to watch, and it just broke out like a lot of times, and I don't really notice that, or I don't remember that kind of framing for fights in a lot of other Scorsese films. I think like this is more indicative of a younger sort of experimental sort of approach to
maybe he had a couple of them in the Gangs of New York, but there's very few of that
Not
exact
that.
frame. What's that?
Not like that. Not like with the camera.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, but I
think there's more static shots.
Same
Not
in
me.
the sense that it's in like things like Goodfellas, Departed, Casino, like it's a lot more gunplay, and B, even when there is some kind of hand to hand, there's usually cutlery involved pretty much immediately. If you take a look at like Casino with Joe Pesci and the pen, for example. That's not a rough scene in the way that it's like framed and like, oh, this, I feel like I'm there. That's a rough scene in that it goes from 0 to 60. Where what's fun about some of these barroom brawls is that they seem almost realistic to a fault in a good way, because these people aren't like trained in fighting and they're falling over themselves.
Right.
Well, another thing about too what you're just mentioning, Nick, is that a lot of Scorsese's violence in these barroom scenes is so focused on the action that's happening, in that very specific scene that you just mentioned, the pen scene in the early stages of Casino. I mean, he's focused on just Joe Pesci's face and the, just way he's just shoving the pen, and then we get a close-up of the pen and the close-up of the guy's like neck bleeding and everything. So it's way more interest on the tighter frame than here where, like Toussaint is mentioning, like you're just kind of angling down off of whatever, boom you're on or whatever, and seeing what is transpiring throughout the entirety of that, quadrant of the room.
Yeah.
Not to mention that a movie like this versus this later is the difference between people who are good at being criminals versus people who are not. You know, which not being mean streets and good being what
The
comes
low-level
later.
thugs versus the people who are basically pulling the strings and like commanding those people that do that. Yeah, I overall my broad impression of it is like, yeah, I enjoyed this. I don't enjoy this probably as much as like Scorsese's more like mature fare, like as he moves on from this point. But I can totally see, as has been mentioned before, sort of the gestures and the sort of like contours of what kind of filmmaker he would become later on in his career. And I enjoyed those. I enjoyed the iteration of those sort of shots and those sort of sequences that just get improved upon as he gets better.
Before we move on to Nick, I have a question for you, Toussaint.
Yes, please.
I'm thinking of right now, and I'm just going to ask, because it is not a big part of this film, but it is definitely prevalent, especially early on. What are your thoughts on how this film thinks about race relations?
Oh boy, man.
Wait, why are you asking Toussaint, not me?
I think that it's
pretty subtle here for the most part.
It's pretty subtle, but it works
Compared to his other movies.
Yeah, pretty subtle compared to his other films, and I think it's totally plausible and just like, I mean, it's totally believable with the type of characters that are like on screen and like working on this kind of stuff, that they would at once lust for someone of like a different race, but at the same time stigmatize that. Just like, and they're just, and it comes from sort of this like very insular old boy, like, yeah, you could look, but don't touch because like we stay with our own. Know what I mean?
I was gonna say
right?
the rumor mill is going to like get turned up to 11.
Oh, yeah.
even considered to be thinking about something like that.
Oh, she's hot. She's hot, but no. Yeah.
Not to mention, too, I mean, the character of Charlie is already, shall we say, almost ostracized if someone were to find out that he's dating Teresa because of her epilepsy.
Right.
Even though she's perfectly in line as far as just, Italian and whatnot.
Right.
So let alone a person who is not even, shall we say, afflicted with something like what Teresa, but is, quote-unquote, even worse because of the race and social circle that's completely out of Charlie's reach.
Which is even more curious for the fact that, like, at least going off of like other Scorsese films, and I know that I should more or less focus on this one, and just like it doesn't seem like with this type of crowd they wouldn't mind infidelity just so long as it still stays within those rough contours of what they're supposed to actually pursue. And I'm just like, what the fuck is this?
I don't know. I at least in the way that the culture is presented in this movie.
Yeah.
There's already, shall we say, racism within their own circles.
Oh, absolutely.
So I could kind of understand where a character like Charlie is coming from when it comes, not understand in the sense that I agree with, but I understand the thought pattern behind, if we already start to draw lines in the sand of who's Italian and who's not, then of course it's like multiplied when it goes beyond that.
Oh, yeah.
But I was slightly, because this is my second time watching it, I was surprised but also very happy that there is at least a second scene with if we're talking about race in the film, but with the dancer character, because the first scene, is all from Charlie's perspective, because he narrates what he thinks about her and how he likes her, but, she's black, so therefore he can't or anything like that. But we do at least get another scene where she's basically in control of that moment. And
not giving him the time of day for the most part. Yeah.
And I did at least appreciate that. Scorsese, I wouldn't say he's extremely progressive, because he's not, because especially in his predilection for toxic masculinity, and does he fancy it, or is he commenting on it? I think it's
men
somewhere in the middle, where some people are very strident that he's always commenting on it. I'm like,
it's fucked up, but what are you gonna do?
Yeah,
right. That's tough. That's the.
But at least for a movie from this era and whatnot, at least he had at least the awareness to include spaces in which Charlie does not control the narrative about everything that goes on around him.
One of the great things about Scorsese as a filmmaker, and this is probably best highlighted in The Wolf of Wall Street, and I know that's one of his most recent films, but he does have this really weird ability to both condemn and celebrate somebody at the same time.
Oh, yeah. He doesn't ever shy away from, I would say, the alluring facet of criminality, basically.
I mean, Henry Hill, obviously Jordan Belfort, even everything with Sam Rothstein.
Yeah.
Like, these are characters that would look appealing to the modern day, like how people in the 1920s and 30s, they claim that they felt about Al Capone, is that he's this great uncle-like figure who's taking care of people, and this Robin Hood figure.
Evasion.
Yeah, but he's actually this fucking terrible person. But he's, you still build them up as this kind of cult hero in a way, but yet they're fucking dog shit as people. So, yeah, he just has a really weird way to present the entirety of the characters, good and bad.
Yeah, and Mean Streets, in general, starts his trend in portraying people who are within the criminal system who swear by the quote-unquote unspoken code and hold up that kind of uniformity and solidarity with
kind
others.
Of honorable men among honorable men.
Exactly, without seeing that in and of itself is such a myopic perspective that it it doesn't leave room for any nuance, and all you're doing is horrible shit.
No, Nick, no, you're just not looking at it right. No, that's not what it's about. No.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck you. No.
Whoa!
Hey!
Whoa! Hey! Whoa!
Toussaint, you're not white, so that is racist.
I'm sorry.
What's the matter with you? Whoa! Busting balls over here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I go, I would say that I love this film. It's not my favorite Scorsese, but if I were to choose a Scorsese crime film, this is probably the one that's most up my alley.
Oh, wow.
I certainly have talked, at least somewhat on this podcast, how I recently at least, but have a predilection for this kind of era of filmmaking, especially in this region and whatnot.
Why is that?
Well, because it very closely infringes on exploitation in and of itself.
This is like art house exploitation?
No, not art house, but
I wouldn't say this art house.
No, but just in the sense that there was a lot of films being made in this in New York City and in this era in which, on almost like a shoestring budget, that were very much just kind of provocative, plotless romps of bad taste. And I think,
do you think that they were more devoted to conveying, or at least attempting to convey, a sense of verisimilitude about, like, you know, the lived environment where they were filmed?
I mean, I don't find a movie like this, for example, all that different from like Doris Wishman Sexplo film from the late 60s, where one of the very common plot lines of any sexploitation nudie cutie, their Sexplos from the late 60s, where a girl goes from a Midwest town to the big city and finds that life isn't all that it's cracked up to be, with a very cynical ending. What? I know, right? What? And while Scorsese has a very mafiosa focused lens, it's not all that different from the grimy pictures that were being made in a lot of other genres.
When you mentioned New York and you mentioned this era, was this around the time that Deep Throat was made or not?
No, this came out like pretty much the year, if not a year off or whatever, but depending on if you count like the premiere versus just how long it stayed in theaters. But no, this is basically when, for example, XXX hardcore films were taking off. We do see a shot of basically what's known as the Deuce over on 42nd Street for a very brief second when they're watching movies. Then at one point, besides the fact, and Scorsese tips his hat, I think, because and that's what's always made him a fascinating director, is that he is an exploitation filmmaker. People, I would say, only latch on to the kind of classicism of his filmmaking and I think this film kind of shows this in a nutshell and a contradictory. The first film you see them watching in a movie theater is The Searchers by John Ford, always celebrated as one of the greatest films ever made, and that's John Ford, one of the most classical filmmakers of all time. The second film you see is a Roger Corman film. So, this kind of dichotomy between something that's so, classically Hollywood and then something that's way more kind of rough and raw and not for everybody and very reliant on provocateur type stuff, whether it's violence and sex. That's pretty much Martin Scorsese for me in a nutshell, and I don't think it's a coincidence that you see both of those films in the span of this movie. But I love this movie. I think for one of his crime films, it's pretty great. I think the performances are fantastic. I love that we get to see Robert De Niro be, like you had said earlier, a Joe Pesci character, so to speak, before he would go on to be the more kind of, mature character in a lot of his later pictures. But
I was going to say, I think Taxi Driver and Raging Bull were still towing the line, and then even like some of his.
But in those two movies, they were trying to at least empathize with him.
Yeah.
Here, he really gets to be just nothing but an asshole.
And then he's, even further on, he's playing like the really weird villain in Cape Fear. That's like
but that's a remake, so it's not even really his.
No, but it is.
I know what you mean.
Still. him not, following that very similar path that he followed for such a long time, that then he tried to get away from and be a comedy actor and destroy his career.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
he's giving a really, really strong performance here.
Yeah, and I very much, I watch a movie like this, and I remember why Harvey Keitel was once considered a great actor, because I think he's fantastic in this. But it really makes me wonder what happened to like a whole legion of actors from the 70s, where if you give them about 20 to 30 years, they just became almost uninterested in acting in a way that like no other generation, because we have a lot of terrific actors who only got better with age. I mean, we're seeing a lot of things from people like, I don't know, like Richard Jenkins or something, where like the older they get, like the more they can do no wrong or whatever. Whereas you take this entire league of people like Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, all who have worked with has Al Pacino worked with Scorsese? I don't think so, actually. But in the same similar circles of genre and whatnot, Harvey Keitel, all three of those are kind of the titans of that, genre. And they all just grew up to really not give a fuck unless they worked, I guess, with Pacino will work with Scorsese and the Irishman, but I don't remember if he's worked with them before. And I just find it so weird because they all seem to came from the same, I don't know, Twilight Zone of 70s grimy crime epics and whatnot.
Well, Pacino and De Niro are always linked to the Godfather series.
Yeah.
So they're kind of, and so are other people. So is like Robert Duvall and people like that.
True, and
but,
he hasn't done anything like...
Well, he's getting really old,
good.
though.
Yeah, but even when he was old, he was doing things like Will Ferrell comedies and whatnot.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think the weird thing is that era went through a really weird time in the early 2000s where like the idea of turning these older actors into shells of themselves is like it's such a weird thing. Like it's almost how like women when they got older were treated, where they could no longer play characters of that ilk. They had to play shells of themselves and be in movies like Dirty Grandpa and Jack and Jill.
Well, and that's the thing is like I look at that though and like, but they're also choosing to take those roles, and I just wonder like
they're choosing to get paid.
And I agree with that, but at the end of the day, is there a part of them, and I only see this with men, or at least I only think this with men, that that wish the old days were back where they could play these characters that were just ultimate scumbags and not have... I don't know.
Sometimes you just get old and you just want to cash a check, man.
I get that, but there are at least some roles for quote-unquote old
The other thing
people.
about the two of them specifically is it's not like Morgan Freeman who's literally doing anything because he wants to get paid.
That's a good example, I will
But
say, actually.
like Robert De Niro's
he didn't have
making
like a
movie a year or so.
True, but he didn't. I would say Morgan Freeman got quote unquote more famous as he got older. Like, no one really cared about Morgan Freeman as a young beau.
Yeah, but he's known for things like Shawshank Redemption and Seven. Like,
True.
He's not known for these awful comedies he's making now. So
he's in the bucket list, but but I will say. Like, I have no doubt in my mind that if Marlon Brando was still alive, he'd be in an Adam Sandler comedy or something like that. Like,
I mean, he was already playing that ridiculous character in the movie The Score. Like,
I still have to watch that, actually. It's directed by Frank Oz, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got, I'm telling you,
it
man,
sounds fascinating.
It's one of, like, this weird...
I mean, it's Edward Norton, Robert De Niro?
Yeah, Edward Norton, Robert De Niro, and Marlon Brando.
Yeah,
it's this weird just...
Yeah, we gotta watch
collection of three titans from three pretty much different eras. Yeah. And just, like, the demeaning that Marlon Brando, who is, like a comfortable 350 pounds at this point... The just total demeaning that he gave to Frank Oz on set when he's playing just this minor character in this movie where he's just continuously calling him Miss Piggy and shit like that. Like
that's so great. Yeah, I mean, if Marlon Brando was who he was when he was, like, at the top of his game, like, with, or at least at the peak and maybe downturn of, like, Apocalypse Now, where he famously was awful to work with Francis Ford Coppola, who was also awful to work with, you know, then, of course, I would totally expect that from him, you know, 30 years past his prime and whatnot. Yeah, anyway, I'll get off that tangent, but there's just something about that. They're all so related, I think, in the projects that they chose back then and roughly the projects that they're choosing now, that while I do think that there is probably ageism obviously going on in Hollywood, that said, there's still a lot of very minor but character roles for people their age that I just wonder. I mean, but then again, maybe I don't want to see it because I thought fucking Robert De Niro was the worst part of a horrible movie, which I thought at least, which was American Hustle. I genuinely, so maybe they just can't do it anymore.
I just rewatched that not too long ago.
You did actually. I remember. I saw that on Letterboxd.
I actually think the first 20 minutes is actually genuinely fantastic.
Yeah.
Just because everything surrounding the con artist lifestyle of Christian Bale and Amy Adams was actually very good. And the more it got into like the storyline and the caper that's going on, and Bradley Cooper and Louis C.K.'s characters and all that shit, yeah, everything with Robert De Niro in that was just like. It's like if somebody paid Michael Jordan to play basketball now.
Yeah.
Like you would still be
As
seen.
a joke?
No, just in general. Like somebody wanted to watch Michael Jordan
celebrity charity event or
like,
something.
It's still him, but it's not him.
Oh man, can you imagine that? Like if they paid him to do like a charity event where like the Bulls, whoever's on the Bulls now, and then he'd be on the court, and it would just be a quote unquote game for fun, but like the like awkwardness of like current day players who are certainly not as good today as Michael Jordan was back then,
school his ass,
but are certainly better than what he could do today.
Just play the Harlem Globetrotters theme song in the background.
They'd have to be like, "Oh, Michael, you got this shot," and then like pass it to him or whatever.
Nobody wants to beat up an old man.
Michael would need to play the Washington Generals if he wanted to win a game.
Is Derrick Rose on the Bulls?
No, he's long gone.
All right, that's what I thought, but I just
piece of shit.
That's how much I know about sports.
Last time I saw Michael Jordan,
I was
Jordan,
at a Costco.
Yeah.
He was getting the free samples.
He was fat, and he decided to grow that mustache back, and he, for whatever reason, still likes that mustache, but he grows a Hitler mustache, so he shouldn't have that anymore.
Okay.
He should get rid of that.
Say what you will about Michael Jordan.
Wow.
No, I'm saying say what you will.
Okay.
All right.
But he never made a movie like Kazam, so.
I mean, Space Jam.
Yeah, no, I meant that in a good way. Like, Kazam is a great movie, and yeah.
What do you got against Space Jam? It's him and
not Kazam.
You know, we should do
Murray.
an episode on Space Jam.
We should not.
You should. We should do that.
Really
if we do an episode,
we already put that in the bloodstream. You know what?
On Space Jam, I'm gonna force Alex to do an episode on a movie he doesn't want to watch, but I really love and I really want to talk about. So we'll do that at some point.
That seems like a veiled threat right there.
This is really random, but I brought
like the transcript.
We've gotten way off topic here,
that's okay.
But that's totally fine for
these
this
streets
podcast.
are mean.
Yeah, I was thinking not too long ago about a film that I saw in the theater when I was a kid called Celtic Pride, where these these two white people who are big.
I'm intrigued.
These two white guys who are Boston Celtics fans, one of which is played by Dan Aykroyd, are obsessed with the Celtics.
So it's like Fever Pitch?
Well, no. In that aspect, kind of. But they're...
Is it a gay Fever Pitch?
No. Oh, no. The other one's played by Daniel Stern. Oh, yeah. So anyways... they go to Boston Celtics games every night, and they get very angry when the Los Angeles Lakers are going to come in and beat them. So their plan is to kidnap the black player from the Los Angeles Lakers and hold him hostage so he can't beat their team. and the black player is played by Marlon Wayans, I think.
Ah.
And it was a really bizarre film.
It's from the 90s?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I was going to say,
Oh, yeah.
based on that. Interesting. You know what I thought of the other day? It's a movie we both have seen in our childhood, but I was on Letterboxd randomly, and I was reminded of the wonderful Kevin Bacon movie, The Air Up There. You remember that?
Fuck yeah. Watch it all the time.
Man, we should do an episode. If we do Space Jam, we should do a double feature with The Air Up There, because I think Toussaint would enjoy The Air Up There.
Are you saying that because they go to Africa?
No. Spoilers. Kevin Bacon goes to Africa to find some ball players.
That's great.
Okay. First of all, he drunkenly walks towards this screen during a charity event because he sees these Africans playing basketball in the background.
Man, we really have to watch this movie. It's happening.
He also, doesn't he undergoes something to become part of their tribe so he can play with them in a basketball game?
Oh, no, he's an honorary black person in that movie.
That's great.
Just so you know, if you're thinking this podcast of going off the rails or anything,
Oh,
if you're not
has.
listening to Film Tank to hear a bunch of people bring up movies like The Air Up There instead of the movie that we're reviewing, then you're listening to the wrong podcast.
Sure.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, one thing I will say is you never know where it's going to go because
That's very true.
I would never have thought in a million years we would be talking about Celtic pride in The Air Up There on this episode.
During the episode
but here we are.
Concerning Mean Streets.
Yep.
Yeah.
And by the way, it was Damon Wayans, not Marlon Wayans.
Oh,
racist.
Yes. Racist and incestuous.
Yeah.
Okay. Mean Streets, I'll finish up my opening thoughts and say that I very much enjoy this film. I will say what I do find interesting about Mean Streets is that despite the fact that it comes so early in Martin Scorsese's career, it almost works as a synthesis of a lot of his themes, both that were touched on earlier in his career and much later in his career, because while it is certainly the forebearer of his crime family films, there is also the extremely dominant theme of Catholicism and Catholic guilt and whatnot, which is actually comes out as early as his debut film, Who's That Knocking on My Door, starring Harvey Keitel.
No.
Yes, it does. Oh, you're talking to something up there. Ah, man. Alex brought up the poster for The Air Up There. And I'm just going to read the tagline in case anyone doesn't remember. It's Jimmy Dolan went to recruit a new player. What he found was a whole new ball game. But Mean Streets carries on the theme of Catholicism and whatnot. And I love the way Charlie's character kind of wrestles with it, because as much as we see it in the beginning of him, in the church, it doesn't, the church doesn't become a central location for him. And I kind of love the idea that he's more of a spiritual person than he is a religious one.
Well, he says that in the opening line of the
he
film,
does.
that you don't do it in church, you do it on the street, you do it at home.
Right.
Yeah.
But what I love is that hangs over the entire film. And so even though we obviously don't, not that we needed it, but we don't get scenes of him, at least once, going to confession or something like that, we're always kind of seeing his actions through the lens of kind of reparations. I know you don't like that word, Jason.
I wasn't even going to say anything.
I know, but I listened to the previous episode, or 2 episodes ago or something, where I used that, and you were like, nope.
Lord.
So I was going to crack up. Anyway.
But what was I going to say?
About Catholicism?
Yeah. It was particularly in this case, I think it's really interesting how when he's in the church, he's talking about how for some other people, it's fine to just go in and then go into the booth and confess your sins and do all the Hail Marys and shit.
But it doesn't work for him.
But it doesn't work for him. And I think that's very interesting that he's always in the midst of a quietly brewing spiritual crises in the back of his mind.
Yeah.
Whereas other people, in the case what he's talking about comparatively, is that people are able to compartmentalize their faith alongside of their lived experiences. And I can't tell which one is more, which of those two experiences is one either more authentic, quote unquote, and which one is more useful.
True.
Right?
And what's interesting about his quote unquote struggle is that it kind of defies what most would see as, I would say, an Italian stereotype, which is devout Catholicism and unquestionable faith and whatnot. So here we have him wanting to be a part of a culture that he doesn't even buy into, I would say, the central morality framework of, and that's also why he makes poor decisions.
Because it doesn't absolve his conscience.
Exactly. And what I like, too, is that, you know, because of that, it's what allows him, or I should say what provokes him to look after Johnny Boy and whatnot, because he almost makes himself out to be a martyr-like figure. Like, no one else is going to look after him, so therefore I have to.
Right.
And
he's his brother's keeper.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, it's like taking care of Johnny Boy becomes kind of his one thing that he can point to say, I'm doing good because nobody else is doing this. It's almost like a numbers game for him because of all the bad things he may do as a criminal.
And all the bad things that Johnny does.
Yeah, but this is one that he can point to that nobody else is doing, so therefore it must be worth something, and I find that fascinating. Overall, though, I mean, I just think it's a great movie. I love what you guys have touched on. The pool hall scene is one of my favorite sequences. It goes on pretty long, but it's kind of all the better for it. It's just this ramshackle, prolonged fight, and that's kind of a lot of what's happening in this movie. As far as the phrase goes on too long, you take like the kind of bungled hit on the guy in the bathroom, where the one guy comes into the bar.
It was David Carradine, by the way. He gets
That's
shot at
right.
the urinal. By the way,
Actually, both Carradines were in this film.
You okay there, buddy?
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, both Carradines were in this film, but I don't remember where Keith showed up. But
that guy, like, he stumbled for a while before his death scene.
Oh
out
yeah,
there.
he gets to like
he gets shot 3 times
in the bathroom,
still going
in the bar,
Yep.
and then he gets out of the bar.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's such a bizarre, almost surreal sequence because not only is the kind of guy who's gonna put the hit out, not only is he basically just waiting for a moment because, you know, he's the Carradine guy is just drunk out of his mind on the bar, so he's just waiting and whatnot. So not only is he just chilling, but then when he goes to do the hit, he lets his hair down, almost like it's weird because it's ambiguous as to whether that's supposed to be a signifier to that character as to who he is, or if it's an affectation that it's almost like this disassociative identity of like who he is as a hitman versus who he is as a bar patron, you know. And it's never really clear because they're just in that one scene, and I actually find that scene to be very weird and powerful because of that it's this weird interlude that almost plays out in the background of the drama that is Charlie's life. But it's a good reminder that Charlie wants so badly into a life in which he is not participating at all on the same level of violence and other degrading shit of the people he looks up to. It's like what is happening just behind him is what he would have to do if he really wants to ascend, so to speak. But yet he's so enamored by it that he thinks that he can somehow, you know, move up while still being who he is as Charlie, which is that everybody likes Charlie. And then, of course, Johnny Boy gives him shit for that.
And the Catholic guilt that's on his back.
Yeah.
All the time.
So probably a good segue into talking about the very final scene.
Yeah.
Which is, obviously, we hit on a little bit of Johnny Boy being a smug piece of shit. To someone who probably shouldn't be at the bar, thinking he can just do whatever the fuck because he doesn't care, which genuinely seems accurate. And then, you know, the good thing about this film is that they are just kind of driving there and whatever, and like in a normal setting, like I felt like the film was going to go on for at least, you know, 20 minutes after that. And then there's a literal drive-by shooting that happens, and there's a bunch of shots that go off, and there's a lot happening. And I mean, again, this is probably a victim of a 1973 feature where, you know, we have this guy with clearly like dyed ketchup flowing down his body. You have like the quick editing in there, so you don't really see exactly what's happening. And then we pick up the pieces once the car finally runs over the fire hydrant and finally crashes and parks. But you have the murder of Johnny Boy. You have Harvey Keitel, who's shot through his hand, where he just keeps kind of staring down into that, which is, I feel like somewhat symbolic. And then you have...
Oh, yeah, because that's literally all he's doing throughout the entire film is trying to see if he'll get burnt by a fire and see if it actually does hurt him.
Yeah.
So anyway, not to cut you off,
No.
But that does tie into that.
And then you have the girl, which I'm blanking on her name.
Teresa.
Right. You have Teresa, who obviously is still alive, but that's so fucked up to have her hand through the windshield, and then they have to pull her hand out that went through the windshield. That just feels like it would hurt so much.
Gratuitous?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
a little bit,
not in a bad
not
way,
in a weird a weird Quentin Tarantino way.
No,
but it feel like it lands on what it's going
she's
for.
More of a victim than either one of the other two, as far as being in that situation and whatnot.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
But also too, she probably comes away from it the least scathed of everyone. Obviously, she's not dead, and just she has a mangled hand now. But
although with her condition, if something like a seizure or something would come on, she would also be in a worse position without having anybody with her too.
Yeah,
so anyway.
that's true. But in the sort of
she's the only one who's literally not walking away. As much as she probably is the one who's the best off, Johnny Boy does walk away from the car, and Charlie also does at least get out of the car.
I was gonna say Johnny Boy walks and dies in a bag of garbage bags.
Yeah. But I see what Toussaint means about the kind
bags.
of gratuitousness of her being this almost death-like tableau of the position she's in.
Yeah, that actually really reminded me of the final scene of Chinatown.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, I can see that.
And just waiting for somebody. This is Chinatown. I'm just waiting for that to.
This is Chinatown. See, forget it, Jack. This is Chinatown.
Piece of shit walking by with a transatlantic accent. Yeah, Jack, it's Chinatown. Yeah, get over it. Yeah.
What about it?
That would make that movie better.
Forget about it.
Hey!
Still, that one scene where he rips off that page of the book is just amazing.
Yeah, that was pretty great.
Every time. It always gets me.
As a librarian, it gives me chills.
I'm sure.
So I'm guessing you guys have similar thoughts of just enjoying that final scene, as it definitely abruptly ends the film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it...
And they all go home.
Yeah. They all go somewhere.
They all go somewhere.
It's not quite the same thing, but it definitely gives me vibes of Easy Rider, or in terms Toussaint can understand the season 1 finale of the Venture Brothers.
Oh, yeah.
That's what that was a parody
okay,
of.
yeah.
But where I do like the idea that it's literally called Mean Streets, and so the film quite literally ends on a street, and how no matter what, they are driving away, and, Charlie wants so desperately to be in, but what he doesn't realize is that he is in, and there's no way out. And to kind of have that almost blind spot for something like that, and I think it's a very potent way to end the movie. Quick comment about Johnny Boy. One of his worst moments that I absolutely love is when he and Harvey Keitel have that kind of huge fight on the stairwell with Teresa standing there when Johnny Boy's asking, when she comes, that between Keitel and Johnny Boy and whatnot, that's a wonderful scene just as far as performances go, but that's definitely the height of Martin Scorsese as, on the one hand, he's very accurately portraying a certain form of masculinity that in no way should be condoned or anything like that, but is unfortunately an authentic portrayal of certain subsections of the human population.
He's an authentic douchebag.
Yeah. On the other hand, that's also certainly, I would understand, fodder for anyone who would criticize Scorsese for having male characters, literally come into conflict and duke it out over female characters who have no agency whatsoever. So, but it seems like that I think, unfortunately, is what gives Scorsese value and power, because there's something to be talked about there, and the performances themselves are great, because that whole stairwell scene, from it escalating into a seizure for Teresa, and with the old lady coming to actually help, but also chastise, I'm sure, what she's seen a million times before between other young guys in that neighborhood and whatnot. It's just a great set piece.
Yeah, how about the first introduction we get to Teresa, where getting a very bizarre description of Harvey Keitel's dream where he's coming blood.
Yeah.
No,
that's Catholic guilt in a nutshell. Yeah.
Nutshell.
Yeah. That face when you nut, but anyway. But, it's great. That scene is great because I like how that bleeds into... into the sequence prior, where at first, for a first-time viewer, I think you don't know if it's an actual dream, because he's in the literal time and space of the scene with Robert De Niro in that apartment, but then all of a sudden it has moved on in an instant over there, and that's the first time you even know that they're in a relationship and whatnot. But the editing of that scene, I know, kind of startled Toussaint in a good way, because then there's the finger gun scene where he pulled that up to Teresa, but there's an actual gunshot.
That was bizarre.
And then cut to just another shot of their conversation.
Yeah.
And I find it very striking in a good way, because it makes me very uncomfortable with the way, I would say, casual misogyny just drips out of these characters, and how, while it goes uncommented on because it's probably par for the course, to anyone watching, and I think that's why Scorsese kind of accentuates it with the sound effect, I would just say it's aged very well, because it's very uncomfortable, and it really takes you out of the moment in a good way, where you're kind of watching something and feeling the reverberations beyond just casual conversation. So, but yeah, I very much enjoyed that sequence.
So, going to final ratings, I am definitely a fan of this film, and I would give it a pretty standard rating that I would give films that I really like, which is 3.5 out of 5. I already said almost everything that I wanted to say about this film, so I'll pretty much just leave it by saying that just another very solid Martin Scorsese film, as most of them that I've seen are. So, moving on to Toussaint.
I would give this a 3 out of 5. Yep, I liked it. I wasn't over the moon about it, but I think that it is a very capable film, and obviously Scorsese has gone on to make more incredibly capable and great films, but I can totally see where this is one of the earliest sort of pinpoint marks of indicating where he would go from here.
Yeah, I love this movie. I give it a 4 out of 5. I think it is very much a foundational text for Scorsese as a filmmaker. And while, he may make better films after this, it's very much almost like the Casablanca of his filmmaking career, in the sense that when you watch it, you realize that you've always had some of these shots and some of these effects or editing tics in your lexicon, and you never quite knew where it all originated from, and it was this movie. And I love the performances. I probably find this to be my favorite of his crime films, simply because without Thelma, who I do think he's better off with, we do get a slightly more unfiltered Martin Scorsese in this picture, and I kind of like that languid pace, so to speak, but I definitely agree he would go on to hone his craft to a ridiculous degree, but there's something to be said about the raw power of a movie like Mean Streets, especially when you make it 4 movies into his career, at a time when he was making one a year, really, shoveling them out. So for him to pretty much hit, for what I would say, a home run on this outing, and then go on to make actual masterpieces is pretty good career trajectory.
Yep.
So, yeah, 4 out of 5.
Wonderful. So, if you out there have any thoughts on Mean Streets or any other Martin Scorsese films, always feel free to catch up with us at filmtankshow@gmail.com, or you can find us also on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Film Tank Show. Our next episode is going to be on the new Brad Pitt film, which is Ad Astra.
Brad Astra.
Yeah. All kinds of fun wordplay things there.
Nick's not going to see it. He's just going to make a bunch of puns while Alex and I talk about it.
Don't shortchange me. I can do both.
I was going to say, he'll still say more about it than we will, so that'll be good.
Oh.
That will be...
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Don't give him too much credit.
That's a very interesting science fiction film.
I was going to say, we're in a position, weirdly enough, before we record the episode, where you two have seen this movie, and I have not.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell, you guys?
Yeah.
That's on you, man.
How
That's
dare
on you.
It is. I had fucking family visit.
Yeah.
So that'll be
Fucking
coming
family.
up on our next episode. You can catch that episode, this episode, and all of our episodes on filmtankshow.com, or you can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and a number of other... Spotify, a number of other places. Yeah. One of these days, I'll just remember that that's a place we're listed on without Nick having to remind me.
Yeah, that's okay. I just find it weird that we're there, so I like to say it.
Well, there you go. So all that coming up on our next episode, and also just anytime you want with any of our podcasts that are on the interwebs right now. From Nick Cheney, Toussaint Egan, myself, Alex Diekman, as always, thank you very much for joining us here on Film Tank. Looking forward to catching back up with you next time.